Have you ever faced a financial decision, insurance, retirement accounts, estate planning, and you just thought, this feels impossible. I don't even know where to begin. Today, we're going to walk through how to determine your next steps, what to focus on when everything feels overwhelming. Welcome to another episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast, where we want to empower and educate women to live your retirement on your terms. I'm your host, Eric Blake, practicing retirement planner for more than 25 years, founder of Blake Wealth Management, and I would not be the man I am today without the women in my life. For many women, especially those who have gone through a major life event like a divorce, loss of a spouse, any type of significant financial transition, money can suddenly feel a lot more complicated than it used to. And if you're facing retirement on your own, it can feel like every financial decision rests squarely on you. One of the things I hear almost every day is, Eric, I feel overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. I'm not even really sure what questions I should be asking. And that makes sense. These situations aren't just financial, they're emotional. You may be sorting through grief, uncertainty, any type of big change, and all while trying to make decisions that impact your financial future. So it's easy to feel stuck and unsure about your next step. And that's why today's conversation is so important. Today's guest is Tony Steuer. Tony is an internationally recognized financial preparedness advocate, award-winning author, podcaster, and financial technology advisor. He's the host of the Get Ready Money podcast and the creator of the Get Ready movement, where he helps people understand and organize their financial lives in a simple and empowering way. Tony Steuer, welcome to the Simply Retirement Podcast.
Hi, Eric. Glad to be here today.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to have you on. We've been working on this for, I think, about a year now when we first connected, and trying to actually get on each other's podcasts. So I'm glad we've got it together. We got you on today. I'm really excited about this. I think I've had a chance to listen to a lot of your content, read a lot of your LinkedIn posts, and I'm really excited to have you on. But before we dive in, I would love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about your journey, what led to the work you're doing now, and specifically creating the Get Ready movement.
Well, I started out quite a few years back as a fee-based insurance consultant, which is what I did for the majority of 30 years. Over that time, I worked predominantly with other advisors. I also spent a decade on the California Department of Insurance Curriculum Board. And through that, and through doing some litigation consulting, I got to see sort of behind the curtain of what was happening with existing life insurance policies sold by other people. And so I spent a lot of time getting into best practices, learning about fraud, helping to create tools to lead to better best practices. And that led me to the conclusion that it wasn't really about the numbers. So oftentimes I would be called in and an advisor would say, hey, my client has all these life insurance policies. Tell me what to do. And we'd make these recommendations and the client still wouldn't take action. So I realized that it really wasn't about the numbers. These were smart people. They understood the challenges. They had an advisor who fully understood the issues, but yet they wouldn't make changes that were in their best interest. So I got deeper on the psychology and financial behavior and all that. And that led me to starting a podcast, becoming more involved with financial literacy, because the other thing I realized was that we don't know what questions to ask. And that is really the most important thing, is knowing which questions to ask, as you alluded to in your intro. And that was my first book, Questions and Answers on Life Insurance. And that's led me to this journey where I've concentrated really on helping people feel confident that they know which questions to ask.
Well, I think that's so important when you think about some of these major life transitions. And as we were preparing, we went back and forth messaging each other, talking about the reality that many women face, especially after some of these big life events or any type of big financial challenge, is that feeling of overwhelm. But talk about why it's so important to even just acknowledge that feeling, and what's the first step someone can take when they don't know where to start or what questions to ask.
Well, I think first of all, you have to acknowledge the feeling. I think sometimes, we feel like we're supposed to know what to do. And so we take action because we don't want to be the one who says, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Think back to our days in school where you didn't want to be the one who raised your hand to say, hey, I don't understand what's going on, because everybody just nods because they don't want to be that person. And I think that's part of it is, you're hit with a bunch of emotions, grief, anger, whatever, that you're facing. But as you point out, it's overwhelm. And part of that for me is that there's a preparation issue and a communication issue that should be happening between couples before something happens, but that it's also when something has happened, you are going to be overwhelmed. It's just natural because there's so many things going on. You're being hit with all the stimulus. People are asking you to make decisions. So what I recommend to people is the simple thing is to stop, take a deep breath, and don't make any rash decisions and don't make any big decisions. Is you have time on most things, and to take that time to really think about what you want to do and what's best for you, not what you're being told to do by other people.
I love that you brought up the idea of being in the classroom and not wanting to be the one that asked that question, because we also, as you get older, you hear people say, "Well, if you've got the question, there's probably a pretty good chance somebody else has that same question." But along those lines of thinking about the fact that we didn't learn a lot of this in school, and that phrase that I love that you use, I've heard you use it on and describe it on a few different podcasts, and that is financial fluency and comparing learning about money to learning a new language. And I think that's a great concept because again, if you don't know what you don't know, if you're speaking a brand new language, you got to start somewhere. So can you talk a little bit about what financial fluency means and why that mindset is so helpful for someone who's just trying to just find their footing?
Well, it's exactly as you say, is financial fluency is taking a look at it as learning a different language. Is there's no shame or judgment in not knowing a different language. I don't know how to speak Japanese, but I don't feel ashamed or judged by it. Um, and so when we look at financial literacy and financial education, that we oftentimes feel shame and judge, is being told that you're illiterate does not bring out positive feelings. So reframing it as fluency, where you're learning a different language. And in the world of money, there's so many different languages that you need to learn. Is, as part when I did my work as a consultant, as part of a team of advisors, I didn't know how to speak tax. I knew how to speak enough tax to be able to interact with the attorney, but taxes were not my language. And so that's how I think we need to think about this. So for somebody who's being overwhelmed with something is to say, hey, I just need to learn the basics. So if you're traveling on vacation to a foreign country, you're usually going to learn a few phrases to help you get by, like, okay, where's the bathroom? How do I get around? Do you speak English? Whatever you're going to ask. So I think that's the important thing is to understand that it's okay to not know these things. The question is, how do you get to learn a foreign language?
And I think one of the things that I experienced quite a bit is, a lot of the women that we work with was at least at the beginning, there's some level of embarrassment behind when it comes to finances. Either a lot of times it's because maybe the spouse was handling a lot of that, and they're just now trying to get their own hands around it and just understand and to begin. But beyond just the emotional component of now, on top of all that, I've got to figure out my own financial situation. So, from your perspective, why do you feel like shame shows up around when it comes, especially around money? And again, how can someone begin to let go of that shame and that embarrassment to take those first steps forward?
Well, I think part of it comes from is just society's expectations is that you're an adult, you should know these things. But as you pointed out, we don't learn about these things anywhere along the way. There are some financial literacy education programs now in schools, but
Hmm.
where did you learn about insurance? Where did you learn what the term deductible meant? Is you learn that somewhere along the way, or you didn't learn it. So I think that's where a lot of the shame and embarrassment comes from is because you feel like you should know something. And that's always where you feel the pressure is that you feel like you should know something, and you don't. But you never had the opportunity to learn it. So you have to give yourself grace to say, okay, I don't know this. And it's okay to say, I don't know. That is the most powerful thing that you can do. And the most powerful thing you can do is to ask someone for help. Is if you've ever asked anybody for help, and we've all asked somebody for help, people are usually willing to help out and to help you learn something and to explain. So that's the key for you. If you're feeling overwhelmed, is to think about what you want to learn about, to ask for help, and then to ask questions until you feel satisfied. It's your right to keep asking questions. And if you're working with an advisor or somebody else, like let's say a funeral home or whatever, you have the right to keep asking questions. You are the client. And so it's within your power to ask questions.
But I think that it reminds me of a story. We have a prospective client who we're still kind of working through some initial stages with. And that's exactly what I told her. She came to me. She's in the middle of a divorce, and I like literally in the middle where they're going through disclosures and all these different things. And she shared the fact that her husband has worked with a financial advisor for over 20 years. She had never had a conversation with this advisor. So that's a whole nother issue that I have. But beyond that, never being involved in that, never being part of that conversation. And I told her the first thing that when we sat down to talk about where she's at, I said that you've already taken the best step that you can. And that's being willing to ask for help, ask for the right people to provide guidance, ask questions, never hesitate to ask questions. And that also leads me to one other the concerns that I know you and I both have is, when somebody's already feeling some of this uncertainty and vulnerability, is they can often become the target of the wrong kinds of advice. So when we're thinking about people that have gone through a divorce or recently lost a husband for whatever reason, becoming a widow, is a lot of times they're going to get targeted by scammers or high pressure salespeople. And you've seen some pretty incredibly serious cases, and I know with the work you do, when we're talking about financial abuse, what are some of the biggest red flags you think people should be looking out for when evaluating the advice or recommendations that they may be receiving?
Well, one is, there are common issues in a lot of financial fraud cases is scammers follow, a pretty standard playbook for the basics. One of those is applying time pressure. So anytime you hear somebody say, you need to do this right now, that's a red flag. If they're saying, you need to take advantage of this investment by tomorrow, if they tell you that you can't talk to somebody else about it, that's a red flag. So if you say, I want to talk to my sister about this just to make sure, I fully understand it. And they say, well, it's better off if you don't talk to your sister about it because, you're the best person to know this and you don't want to tell her about it. The other thing that they do is related to that is that they tell you that it's a secret that no one else knows, that there are no secrets. So that's something that they do. And so that's part of an isolation. So, we see that with some advanced scams, especially with the elderly, is we've all heard stories about that where the caretaker becomes their best friend and then they're all of a sudden they're taking them to the bank, or taking out insurance policies on them. But it's because they've isolated them from the rest of their people. So if somebody is trying to isolate you, that's also a red flag. Um, so those are probably two of the big ones is the time pressure and the isolation, as well as I mentioned, is, sort of that whole thing about, don't talk to anybody else about this. That is part of the isolation strategy. And then you can go down and find other common factors, but those are two of the big ones to think about.
What it reminds me of, we go through our what we call our Simply Retirement Roadmap process. And that is where we're sitting down with the client and prospective client and walking through what their wishes are, what their goals are. I come back ultimately with recommendations for what I think they should be doing. But then that is followed by what I call our take your time step, where I explain to them, I don't want you making any big decisions right now. I want you to take the time to think about it, digest everything we've talked about. And then even if we need to schedule another time to chat and go through your questions, then let's do that. But I think it comes from, the financial services. There's always I even think back to my training days of, when you had to learn to close. And there was the walk out of the room close, there was the forest for the trees close, all these different things that we learned in financial services that today just don't really apply. So from the standpoint of, what do you see beyond what you just shared a few of those, I think, but in terms of like pressure tactics, act now pitches, uh, Why do you feel like it would be so important for the individual to slow down before making these major financial decisions?
I learned this. I used to do wilderness first response medicine and some whitewater rescue. And it's one of the things we learned as a first responder or a rescuer is to, literally a friend of mine came up with this, is to put our hands in our pockets before we took action, to take a deep breath. The first thing you're taught is to survey the scene and to make sure you know fully what's going on before you get involved. And that's the same thing that we're thinking about with our money, is that you need to recenter yourself. What salespeople do is they try to get you focused on whether a product is good or bad, whether or not you should purchase a product. And life insurance salespeople, that's pretty much all they do. And that's what I've advocated against, is you need to come back to, as you talk about, to your goals, to your values, to what you're trying to achieve. And once you're sticking to that and you're very clear on what your values are and what your goals are, then the question becomes, is this product the right product to help me meet my goals and values? And so that's the thing, is because you can get into so many of these products, especially the insurance products, where you're locked in with really long surrender charge periods, or on some of these annuities. People need to be really careful because there's like every 10 years, there's like a 30-day window where you can take your money out. And the regulators keep trying to shut those down, and they keep reappearing in different formats. So those are the things, is if you come back and say, well, you know what, I'm going to need liquidity, I want access to my money, then you can say, well, this annuity is not going to get me there. And I'm picking on annuities now, but that's the kind of thing that happens, is because people aren't thinking about their goals and values. They get blinded by thinking about whether or not they should purchase that specific product.
But I think that's so unfortunate that, you and I both, I think, agree that one of the most important parts of a financial plan, which also has maybe the worst reputation when we're talking about these scare tactics or aggressive sales techniques, is insurance. Whether we're talking about life insurance or long-term care, or you talked about annuities, which kind of can fit into that insurance category. Uh, from the standpoint of the financial fluency concept, how can we help somebody evaluate these complex and emotional decisions when it comes to, specifically around insurance? And I think you actually shared that your background is more fee-based insurance, which I think is very interesting, and maybe even share a little bit about that, what that actually means.
So what I did as a fee-based insurance consultant was I would come in and review, for the most part, existing life insurance policies. So a financial planner would get a new client, and their client would have 5 or 6 policies that they accumulated over their life. And the advisor would say, take a look, review these policies, and let us know if these policies make sense for the client,
Hmm.
the insurance needs that the client has. And I would tell them the pros and cons of the policies and if there were any red flags. And quite often there were a lot of red flags. So that's what I spent a lot of time doing, is almost helping the advisors undo existing life insurance portfolios, because it comes down to an unalignment of values and goals in the insurance policies that people are sold. So you're 25 years old. This happened to a woman I know. She's 25 years old, single, no dependents, just getting started in life. And she was talked into buying a whole life insurance policy, with a $500 a month premium. She's not fully funding her retirement plans or anything. Now, I'm not an investment advisor, so I'm not giving an investment advice there, but I think that would have been a better choice for her. But instead, she's in this life insurance policy that has a 16-year surrender charge that is just not going to provide her what she thinks it's going to provide her. And so it's like this unalignment of her goals, but it's really because she didn't know what questions to ask. She was sold it to her by a cousin. So it was somebody she trusted. And a lot of financial fraud, financial abuse, elder abuse comes from people we know, from family and friends. And so that's the thing, is you have to also, that would be another tip, is to separate out the person from the product or service, and to make that decision again based upon who you are and what you want to achieve, not what somebody else thinks you should do. And that gets back to the shame and the judgment is because you don't want to tell your family no. You don't want to tell a cousin that, no, I don't need this crazy expensive whole life insurance policy. So it does all tie back together.
But I think so. One of the things that, and I don't think I actually realized that where, as far as where your work was, I think it's a great concept. So it sounds like you actually worked more with the advisor to come in as the consultant, as you talked about, and being able to provide those second set of expertise, expert eyes to look at these types of things. Where as a financial advisor, you might not always be fully up to speed on all the bells and whistles of a long-term care policy or of a particular life insurance policy. So can you talk a bit about that as far as where you do your work or where you did your work or how somebody might be able to incorporate that idea into their own financial planning?
Well, so I still do it a little bit, but the predominance of my work was with financial planners. I did
Okay.
work with some trust officers. I did some litigation consulting on complex cases where we were trying to figure out what was going on, what happened, how the client was harmed. I also did that with some nonprofits. Is quite often people try to give faulty gifts to nonprofits or gifts, like they give land that's on the side of a hill because they want to get rid of it. So, essentially a lot of what I did was, working with different yeah, advisors would be the best word for it, sometimes plan giving officers, but helping to figure out, okay, what is really going on here? And insurance policies are very tricky because they have all these factors, and indexed universal life is one of the worst policies out there. It's incredibly complex, but it's one of the most, you know, sold products on the marketplace today. And the thing is, that we don't get back to thinking about what we actually need and what we're trying to accomplish. And it does get back to financial fluency and thinking about, like, okay, what questions do I want to ask? But we don't even ask the question like, okay, what's my purpose here? So if you're a widow and you're 50 years old or 60 years old, and sometimes widows are even younger, it's like, well, what are you trying to achieve? What is your goal? What are you comfortable doing? Instead of thinking about, like, okay, I need to take care of the investments right now, is think about, like, okay, well, now that I don't have a spouse, when do I want to retire? Do I need life insurance? Because I was carrying it for the benefit of my husband who's now dead. So you have to evaluate those things based upon changing circumstances.
But I think one of the things, and that maybe leads into my next question for you, is one of the first things we want to think about is how do we get organized, and that should almost be very high on the priority list. Is just starting to put the pieces together of understanding what I have, what I don't have. So, just if you wouldn't mind, just share some just simple steps someone can take to just start organizing their financial life and making sense of the different documents they may have, whether it's investment statements, life insurance statements, whatever it might be. Just some initial simple steps they can take.
Well, my book Get Ready covers that, and I've made available for free on my website all the worksheets from Get Ready. It takes you through, yeah, I think 7 core areas: assets, investments, insurance, estate planning. So the first thing is just to start making a list. You can go to my website, download the worksheets for free, or you can just start a spreadsheet and make a tab for investments, make a tab for insurance, and start listing out every insurance policy you have. Start listing out every retirement account you have. And that's really important for a couple things. Is sometimes you find out, like, wow, I've got 4 different 401ks at different employers. So that happens. The other thing that happens, and this is what came up quite often in working with their advisors, is clients would forget that they had these insurance policies. They were on auto pay. And then all of a sudden they were going, wow, I'm paying for 4 different policies. I didn't even realize it. With the same insurance company, these are different policy numbers. And that would come up quite frequently as the client wouldn't even realize what they had. So doing an inventory is one of the most important things you can do. And you can think about it like when you go on a vacation, is you make a list of the things that you're going to need on the vacation. You're going to need maybe a toothbrush, deodorant, whatever your list is going to be. but you have to know what you're bringing. You don't just throw a bunch of stuff in your suitcase and hope that you have everything that you need. So getting back to your financial life is you inventory everything. And that's the first step to organizing everything, is because you have to know what you have.
That's awesome. So I want to make sure you've already kind of touched on a few of the different resources, your book, and some different things that you're doing to help with this process. Where can listeners connect with you, learn more about that Get Ready movement, and access some of these tools and resources you've created to help people get more organized and more confident with their money?
They can go to my website, tonysteuer.com. They can join the Get Ready movement there and have access to 150 different worksheets to help you organize and monitor all areas of your financial life. LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. I'm not really on any other social media channels. And then my podcast, the Get Ready Money podcast, features all types of guests. And you're an upcoming guest, so I have people like you on who deal with different areas and can help people think differently about their money and how they're looking at things. Because that's what I think is the most important, is how we approach these things. And my hope is that with guests, if somebody listens to a guest like you, they can say, okay, I learned what questions to ask because Eric raised some new ideas for me.
That's awesome. And we will definitely make sure we share all those links that you've included in our show notes today. Tony, thank you so much for joining. This has been an incredibly valuable conversation. To our listeners, thank you for being here today. If you're navigating a major life transition like widowhood or divorce or some type of career shift, or you're just facing retirement on your own and you're really not sure where to start, just remember that you don't have to know everything. You just need to know what the first step is, know what that first question is to ask. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're unsure where to begin, be sure to connect with Tony, explore the Get Ready movement, and check out those links in the show notes, which you can find at thesimply.retirementpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please follow and share the show. It is going to help us reach more women who need this kind of support. Until next time, please remember, retirement is not the end of the road. It's the start of a new journey.
That's it for today's episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast. We hope you found our insights and advice helpful in planning for a fulfilling retirement. Don't forget to take action on what you've learned today. Visit our website at blakewealthmanagement.com to learn more about our firm and review our Simply Retirement Roadmap process to get you on the right path to the retirement you deserve. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to helping you achieve your retirement goals. Remember, retirement is not the end of the road. It is the start of a new journey. So embrace it and make the most of it. Until next time, take care. Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security, or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Blake Wealth Management. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Blake Wealth Management or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor, Blake Wealth Management, and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.